if you look at an association is a legal entity, meaning it's registered with the Secretary of State.
Is it like a corporation or like a nonprofit?
Yeah, sometimes there's different variables of how they identify or how they structure. But really, what bylaws are, they go to corporate governance, right? It's how do they manage this entity that is the association. So you can almost lump that into more of a corporate governance structure, which are bylaws.
Yeah.
How are meetings run and just the ticky-tacky nature of that entity. And then the CC&Rs become sort of a more broad set of guidelines for the community itself. What do we do with the common area? What paint color do you need to use? If you want to remodel, what does that look like? I'm Luke Carlson, and for almost 2 decades, my law firm, Carlson Law, has been at the forefront of defending homeowners against overreaching HOAs. We're not just leading the charge, we've created the go-to playbook on how to fight back effectively. Join us as we delve into the world of HOA disputes, sharing insights from our extensive experience and landmark victories. Throughout this podcast, we'll bring you in-depth interviews, demystify complex legal principles, and provide practical tips to safeguard your rights. While the information provided shouldn't be taken as legal advice, our aim is to empower you with the knowledge, strategies, and real-life success stories needed to navigate and overcome the challenges posed by overreaching HOAs. Hi, Luke Carlson of Carlson Law. Welcome back to the podcast, Bad HOA. Again, I have Marty, our producer. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here as always. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I love today's topic because we reference CC&Rs and bylaws all the time. And this episode is unique because we're actually going to really just focus on bylaws and CC&Rs.
Yeah, this one was interesting because as I was thinking about it, so many people that even we see that are potential clients of the firm, they use the words bylaws and CC&Rs interchangeably and not knowing that there's a difference between the two. And the other thing that I always found fascinating was I always considered CC&Rs the restrictions that one gets put on, but really that's a big part of the strategy when it comes to fighting HOA disputes is that you refer back to the CC&Rs to say, oh no, actually the HOA is not abiding by the CC&Rs, which was a fascinating topic. So I'm like, you know what? I think this is a topic that we really need to deep dive and explore. And I think that on the people on the other side of this, for the uneducated homeowner such as myself, is going to be highly relevant and something of note. So anyway, that's where we came down.
I love the topic. And it's interesting too. We talk about homeowners, but we also talk about in this episode, before you actually buy the property, how important these documents are.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue that people get into these HOAs or buy a home and they don't understand what they got themselves into.
You know what it's like? It's like buying a board game that looks really cool, but never reading the instructions. And then when you sit down with it and you realize, oh my God, there's like 100 pages of like rules on this thing.
Yeah.
Right. And it's important to kind of gauge what you're getting and what you're bound or what you're going to become bound to.
Yeah, don't buy it based on the box art.
Right. And then people sometimes buy the house. They say, oh my God, this is a beautiful house. I love the community. And their agent throws, these governing documents out and they never look at them though.
Yeah. I mean, it's how many things, I know you're a lawyer, but how many terms of service and things that we have that come by us every single day by way of the internet or whatever. And we just check the box. Let's go.
Right. Because you don't think that they're not relevant actually until they're very relevant. Right. So let's dive in. First thing, let's clarify what CC&Rs stand for.
Yeah.
Because, you ask people and you get some weird responses. They think it's like California Code of Restrictions or, I've gotten a lot of strange references to CC&Rs, but really it's covenants, conditions and restrictions. Okay. That's what CC&R stands for.
Okay.
And, to put a finer point on it, really what it is, it's this legally binding document, right? So when you first acquire a property, typically you sign something which says you're going to abide by it. That's typically a step. But really what it is a document that runs with the land.
Yeah.
Meaning when you sell, that document's going to continue to run with the land to the next owner, right? And it's a recorded document, right? So they record it with the county and it becomes a very, very powerful tool that really identifies not only what your obligations are to the community, but also what the association, what their obligations are to you as a homeowner. So it's a tremendously important document.
Yeah. let's dive. Well, let's go. That's a great like overview of CC&Rs. Let's define bylaws real quick, and then we can start kind of splitting the two
No,
up.
I think that's smart. So if you look at an association is a legal entity, meaning it's registered with the Secretary of State.
Is it like a corporation or like nonprofit?
Yeah, sometimes there's different variables of how they identify or how they structure. But really, what bylaws are, they go to corporate governance, right? It's how do they manage this entity that is the association. So you can almost lump that into more of a corporate governance structure, which are bylaws.
Yeah.
How are meetings run and just the ticky-tacky nature of that entity. And then the CC&Rs become sort of a more broad set of guidelines for the community itself. What do we do with the common area? What paint color do you need to use? If you want to remodel, what does that look like?
Yeah.
So it's different in nature and what they govern, really.
Yeah.
But if you look at bylaws, look at it as the rules of that entity itself.
So would a good example of that be how elections are ran?
Yeah.
Would that?
Yeah. Like elections, how they run meetings, what a special meeting is, what an executive session is. And the more precision, obviously, I think the better the bylaws, right? The more articulate they are.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, bylaws don't have to be recorded.
Oh, interesting.
But
and CC&Rs do.
CC&Rs do, yeah.
Okay. So who are they typically recorded with?
The county recorder's office.
Okay.
So in theory, you could go to the county recorder's office and request a copy.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it should be on file. Now, sometimes you run into situations where they're not recorded, which is another issue, but that's sort of rare.
Yeah.
I have seen it. But yeah, you actually do have access to those documents. So, but like I said, they run with the land. And again, CC&Rs govern really community functioning.
Yeah.
And then bylaws are really targeted just to the entity itself.
Okay.
But they are powerful as well. Because you got to think about it. How does the association, how does the board govern itself?
Yeah.
That's articulated, right? And some of the problems that we see is when they disregard those bylaws. They run it differently than what the bylaws dictate it's like playing, again, I'll go back to the board game. You ever play Monopoly with a kid? It's horrible because they don't follow any of the rules.
Well, I'm just going to call it as it is. Monopoly is just a horrible game.
Well,
okay. I know, subjective.
I'm very good at Monopoly, so I disagree. Respectfully.
Yeah, it's just too long. And it's just...
Well, I like it because it is an endurance game. And I have endurance. So I don't mind. I will be the last person on that board.
See, I like chess.
Chess is wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great game.
That can be a long game unless you have a timer, which I prefer to play with the timer.
Yeah. Yeah, you should play with timer.
Yeah. So anyways, okay, getting back to this.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we situated CC&Rs bylaws nicely, but going to the CC&Rs, maybe we should identify sort of the common areas.
We should. We definitely should identify kind of dive a little bit deeper into what CC&Rs typically have in them.
Okay. And I want to make a distinction early on.
Okay.
Because, CC&Rs are very interesting. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of them by now.
Yeah.
And sometimes you sit in front of a file and they're beautiful CC&Rs. They're articulate, they're updated, there's no gaping holes in them. Yeah. And then on the other side of that spectrum, you see, archaic, antiquated CC&Rs that were written on a typewriter, drafted on a typewriter. I've seen some so bad where I've actually seen tape, like they actually cut and like put it over to amend, and they taped it and then they photocopied it. So I guess the point that I'm making is, really look at your CC&Rs, because often the more antiquated ones, the ones that haven't been updated, the ones that are not current, the ones that are filled with ambiguities, those cause so many problems in the community. Yeah. For me, that's the biggest red flag. Especially if I was buying a community and I see, tape on some of the provisions.
Is it, we talk about the board members having a fiduciary obligation to fulfill their role. However, they're not in charge of maintaining those CC&Rs then?
Right. I mean, there are certain regulations in terms of updating them, right? But I think best practices, listen, I don't represent associations. Sure. I never have, I never will. But hypothetically, if I did represent an association, one of the first things I would do would be to look at the CC&Rs from top to bottom. And what I would be looking for is, okay, what are the ambiguities? Okay. What can I clean up? Is it comprehensive? Are there areas that we just don't talk about? And, I think that would be the top priority for me, because a lot of, again, the problems that come out of these associations is just really poorly drafted CC&Rs. So I think best practice is they should be very readable. They should make sense. They should be reasonable, logical.
Yeah.
They should, track Davis Sterling. And
in California, that is.
In California, yeah. And really, you should be able to have a very comprehensive understanding of what my obligations as homeowner are, and then also what are the board's obligations.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes, interestingly enough, that doesn't matter because the board completely disregards the CC&Rs. That's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
But I think, really having a very clean, clear, concise, articulate CC&Rs is a great head start.
I think the other point that's really interesting, though, too, is to know the hierarchy of law. Because, for instance, in California, we've had laws change for drought-tolerant landscape.
Right.
We've had laws that have changed for ADUs. That's a more recent one where California is becoming a lot less restrictive when it comes to ADUs and kind of wants to foster that. But that can be now in conflict with the CC&Rs.
Right. Same with solar.
Yeah, it's solar. That's great. Yeah. So at one point, those can be in conflict. So I think it's important, I guess, to recognize at this point that, number one, they should be updated, but that's not your area of expertise. I understand that. But what happens, what takes precedence? Like the laws get changed in California, but now it's in direct conflict with your CC&Rs.
Yeah.
What takes precedence?
Yeah, not to be too nuanced with it, but in a very general sense. I mean, you're always looking at federal.
That is the highest.
Yeah. Then you're looking at state.
Yeah.
Then you might be looking more local.
Yeah.
And then, sort of at the bottom is the CC&Rs.
Yeah.
So if there is a direct conflict, for example, with the CC&Rs and state, state's going to override.
Yeah.
So you got to be mindful of that. And you also see that a lot. I mean, we've had a lot of ADU issues and solar issues at the firm where the association is trying to sort of enforce very draconian, antiquated CC&Rs, notwithstanding the massive changes in state law.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that's just an educational curve. It's a learning curve for the association to realize. But state law can become a very powerful tool when there is a conflict.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. Okay. I went on a tangent there. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So let's talk about the common areas covered by the CC&Rs, kind of the broad strokes that gets covered.
I think that's good. So one of the big ones is architectural, right?
Yeah.
When you buy into a community, go back. CC&Rs, if you look at their core, what is their utility?
Yeah. Why were they put in place in the first place?
And I think there's a very strong argument that really it's to preserve fair market value. You don't want to be in a situation in a neighborhood where you have one beautiful house and next door, someone's not mowing the lawn. Their paint is falling apart. They have vehicles with cinder blocks. The community is trying to offset that.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you have a very dilapidated house next to your house, that might impact fair market value.
Well, I mean, strictly speaking, if I go into a neighborhood and I look at, wow, what a beautiful house, I'm interested in buying it, and I see a dumpster fire next door,
right? That's going to impact value directly.
100%. I'm not going to put an offer in on that house.
And the inverse is also true. Yeah. Because if you go into a neighborhood and you see everyone's house is very well maintained, there's a consistent sort of harmonious feel to it.
Yeah.
That's going to not only preserve, but will likely enhance fair market value.
Sure.
So really, I mean, that's the drive of CC&Rs.
Yeah.
And I think it's not a bad thing at all. Yeah. It's just when it goes bad, it's bad, right? So architectural elements are a big one.
So that covers like house color, maybe roofs,
design.
I've seen. I had when I lived in a home with the CC&R, they told us how the fences between the properties, like what can and can't be.
Because they're looking for uniformity.
Of the fence. Landscaping, I think we just mentioned.
Landscaping is a big one. If you look at some neighborhoods, they have very specific pet policies.
Oh, yeah.
That might say something along the lines of you cannot have a 200-pound Rottweiler or a dangerous species.
Is that more? Oh, really? That's interesting. Does that take place more in condos, or did you see it across the board?
I've seen it across the board. I mean, you have a single family or a freestanding home, they may say, hey, you can only have X amount of dogs. So there are limitations, there are pet restrictions, but a lot in condos. And often that's a noise issue.
Yes.
Right? Because that's what they're trying to curb.
Yeah.
They don't want you to have 17 dogs in your house. So noise restrictions is another one, right? Because, they're trying to preserve sort of that tranquility in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that might be anything from, when can you start construction? When do you have to end construction?
Yeah.
When can you have an event at your house?
Yeah.
Music, they govern that, right? Again, that's going towards the tranquility factor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So noise is a big one. Rental and leasing rules, that becomes huge.
I feel like this is one that I've heard come up on this as well, quite a bit in terms of the and I think it goes back to like ADUs too, where the ADU law, they had the laws saying that, well, you have to have a primary, the owner has to live in the ADU. I know a lot of those have now.
Right. We have a housing crisis. So state is very bullish on, sort of remedying that in California. But at the end of the day, you're still going to see certain restrictions on rental, lease terms, how that works. Often, if you want to do a short-term rental, and the community allows for it, there's an application process. Sometimes there's a fee associated with it, an application fee.
Yeah.
So they are looking at that.
Yeah. And, with Airbnb and VRBOs and a lot of those that have come about, the short-term rental has become a lot more accessible to a lot more people. So I can see how that would become a lightning rod. In terms of, current day, for you guys, in terms of how many cases come through.
Yeah, it's funny. You see from a geographical perspective, Palm Desert, Palm Springs, it's a huge issue there, right? Because a lot of people have second homes there. Yeah. And they want to monetize it. They're not there all the time.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of conflict between the associations and short-term renters.
Yeah.
That is a lightning rod.
Yeah. That's interesting. The other one we have listed here is the business activities from home.
Right. That's interesting because, I think what they're trying to do is they don't want you to run a commercial business or enterprise out of your home.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to be potentially problematic. It can cause a nuisance. It can, cause a problem with parking.
Yeah.
It can actually, the business activity, depending on what it is, could actually create a nuisance.
Yeah.
Right. They don't want you woodworking 10 hours a day and creating loud noises. So there's restrictions there. And interesting.
Look at that carefully, because I feel like, a lot of people, we live in an era now where working from home is a common thread.
Yes.
Like that is a commonality these days. So, what constitutes working from home? Banging away on the keyboard seems like a fine thing, but doing metal work.
Yeah, and I think really good CC&Rs really define that well.
Yeah.
They'll say, hey, when we talk about commercial activity, this is what we're talking about. Woodworking, metalworking, construction, having 7 visitors a day.
Yeah.
Right. That becomes problematic potentially if the CC&Rs are clear on that.
Yeah.
And that also kind of ties into the parking regulations because obviously, parking is a big deal in some communities. How is that regulated? But a big one that we see, there's been a lot of tension between, parking a commercial vehicle overnight.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, conflict with that. Right.
Plumber still has to come home at the end of the day too.
And park your vehicle somewhere. Or you just happen to have a large vehicle that is technically a commercial vehicle. You don't use it for commercial purposes.
Yeah.
And sometimes, there's certain targeting or fines levied, even though it's not technically commercial.
The Sprinter van.
Sprinter van's a good example. Yeah. Or some of the bigger trucks.
Yeah.
So these are all ripe for controversy. And typically, like I said, the controversy comes from the fact that the CC&Rs aren't very clear. There's an ambiguity.
Yeah.
And a board is, sort of reading it in their favor, or it's silent.
Yeah.
And the board is just shooting from the hip.
Would you say a lot of the disputes that you see are because of ambiguity in the CC&Rs?
I think it's 2 things. It's ambiguity for sure.
Okay.
Second, the association disregards the CC&Rs.
Altogether.
Yeah. And that might be incompetency, as we discussed historically. It could be just a tyrant who doesn't care.
Or they're completely ignorant.
Or ignorance or incompetence, right?
Yeah,
it could be a lot of those variables. But that is also a big reason why we see a lot of disputes.
Yeah.
Is they don't take the CC&R seriously. They don't understand, like, these are the rules of the game.
And these are legal documents.
Right.
I think they do. A lot of tyrants just say, well, they're this kind of, it's there, but doesn't really apply. I'm the czar.
Well, I've said this before. The tyrant is able to do that until someone enforces their rights.
Sure.
Because from a homeowner's perspective, those CC&Rs become a very, very powerful tool.
Yeah.
They do. But often they collect dust. The homeowner isn't really empowered or doesn't really realize that that is the source of power.
Yeah.
And so with education, part of the podcast is to educate the market.
Yeah.
But that's to say, I really encourage people, look at your CC&Rs. The association is not legally permitted to just ignore them.
Yeah.
They're there for a reason.
When you buy a house, are they obligated to provide you the CC&Rs?
It's part of the packet that you get. You get CC&Rs, you get the bylaws, you get this whole, for lack of a better word, a welcome package.
Yeah.
But with your agent, you can procure those beforehand. And a lot of times now they're available online. You go to the association that you're buying into, they'll have the updated version.
Yeah.
And if they don't, and you're having trouble, you could always go down to the recorder's office. There's certain ways to do it, or just request them.
Yeah.
And listen, if you're going to potentially buy and your agent is having trouble getting those CC&Rs, that could be a red flag.
The red flag's waving.
In and of itself.
Yeah.
So,
what would you do if you're buying a house you're shopping for a house, and what are the steps that you would take when you're looking at a house? Number one is try to procure the CC&Rs and read through them.
Yeah, I think that would be.
Would you look at the neighborhood, see if it matches? What would you say are some of the areas that, as a lawyer?
Yeah, so as an HOA lawyer, my approach would be different than most, maybe.
Yeah,
but best practices, some of the things that I would be looking at. One, getting the governing documents, looking at those, going through them, seeing how clear they are, see when they were drafted.
It's a typewriter, and
that'd be a concern.
Yeah.
So I would say, what else are they sort of failing to be current on?
Yeah.
What are they also not caring about? Right. Yeah. Obviously, I'd look at the community. I'd look at the common areas.
Okay.
If they had a clubhouse, if they had a pool, if they had tennis courts, whatever they have, I want to see their condition.
Mm.
If they're dilapidated, or I see a sign, pool closed, my question is how long has this pool been closed for? 2 days. Okay, maybe that's fine.
Yeah.
6 months. It's a red flag, right? So I'm trying to get an idea of how well this community is functioning.
Would you look at the CC&Rs and kind of compare to like for instance, the pool? I'm assuming that it says that the pool will be open so many days, or whatever the case may be, or the architectural standards. Would you look and see if all just take a brief look at the neighborhood, these guys aren't following? Would you?
Yeah, I think in my mind, if I went through CC&Rs and had an understanding of what's supposed to happen, if I drive through the community and I see a bunch of houses that are not uniform, or I see a handful that are dilapidated, or I see a car on
cinder blocks,
right? Yeah. Those are red flags, right? So these are the things that I'd be very mindful of.
Yeah.
The other thing, I guess this is an extra step, I would probably search the court website. It would take me 2 minutes to do so, but I would see, hey, has there been conflict? Has the association been sued historically? And maybe run a 5-year search? Or conversely, how aggressive has the association been on homeowners?
Mm.
If the association has filed 9 lawsuits, I'd probably go even further. I'd probably pull up the lawsuits. But that's a little bit problematic. Potentially, It could be a red flag. Now, it could be understandable. There could be reasons behind it.
Yeah.
But you're sort of taking all of this information, all of these data points, and you're kind of rendering a decision on that community.
Yeah.
And really, you're saying, how healthy is the community?
Do the CC&Rs define, or the bylaws define, what the fines are?
I've seen those defined all over the place. Typically, the most common is there's some sort of fine schedule that will be produced.
Okay.
A clarification, because fines may change year to year, and the association may not go back and modify the governing documents.
Yeah. So
long as they follow procedure, there might be a yearly fine schedule that comes out every year.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as part of the looking at a association, how draconian are these fines?
Mm.
How wide? Because that's at the end of the day, they want to know. I think, as me being a potential home buyer, I can look at a neighborhood and say, yeah, beautiful neighborhood. I can deal with the everyone having this color, or these shades. But how draconian are they? How, because there's a fine line between everyone must keep order to we're talking about the Imperial Empire.
Yeah, right. So if you don't take your trash cans, if you don't pull them back within 24 hours, you get fined $1,000.
Yeah.
That could be a problem.
Yeah.
That could be a red flag, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
So maybe we're getting to overreach, gouging, those types of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that could be a red flag as well.
I mean, I'm not I'm not one to go knock on neighbors' doors. I couldn't even tell you 3 doors down what my neighbor's name is.
Right.
Would you ever door knock on a couple of?
I probably wouldn't. I think that's a little. I mean, I could see people doing that. Now, if I was at the clubhouse and I happened upon a resident, I might chat with them.
Okay.
But I probably wouldn't go so far to actually knock on someone's door.
Okay.
That's just me.
I mean, that's me. That's me as well, but it seems like you could get...
And that's not a lawyer thing. That's just a personality.
Yeah, no,
trait,
100%.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. What else have we covered here? I feel like we covered CC&Rs pretty darn well. You know, the one thing I do want to make mention of, though, is just coming back to the point of that CC&Rs really, it seems like from a legal perspective, that's your go-to. That is a lawyer's go-to. When there's a problem in the neighborhood, when there's a problem with a board member, it seems like the first place that you are going is the CC&Rs.
9 times out of 10.
Yeah. Because that really is the Bible, if you will.
Well, look at it like this. I mean, if you have a business dispute, right? A business owner has a dispute. It's maybe a breach of contract claim.
Yeah.
I mean, your starting point would be that contract.
Yeah.
That's going to start giving you an idea of like, okay, how are we going to run this case? How are we going to angle? What have been where has the association failed in their obligations? And that's really, like I said, that's where you start getting your ammunition.
Yeah.
Without looking at that, I mean, that would be crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it would sort of be negligence. I mean, it'd be malpractice. I mean, to an extent, if you didn't go to the CC&Rs, which is the binding obligations of the parties.
Yeah.
And you try to run a case, you are just in the dark.
I think my point is that for a homeowner, I always thought of, and I lived in an HOA but prior to my current house. My thought of the CC&Rs were always, this is what I can't do. I mean, that's literally my perception of
and
CC&Rs.
I think it's a lot of people's perceptions.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, hey, these are all the rules that I have to follow, and this empowers the association. But a better way of looking at it is that these are also my rights as a homeowner. This is what the association has to do for me.
That is, I think, the perfect way of putting that, because that is one thing I think is is incredibly misunderstood.
Right. I agree. And I see it all the time in the market.
Yeah.
And very sophisticated clients come to us and they have no idea how powerful the CC&Rs are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you get into dispute, I mean, look at the CC&Rs, see where your behavior or the HOA's behavior differs from what is specified in the CC&Rs.
I mean, I'd even go further. Spend 15 minutes, just thumb through them. Go to the index, get a kind of an idea.
Yeah.
15 minutes, half hour, and then hopefully no disputes arise. But when they do, you'll be a little bit more sensitive to it.
Yeah.
You'll say, oh, wait, I remember seeing something in the CC&Rs. Like, that's not a bad form of due diligence just early on, just to kind of arm yourself as a homeowner, just so you're aware of these things. And then you could sort of spot things like, wait a minute, they're supposed to be doing this. I remember seeing that. And that could be a starting point for you.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to kind of scrambling when a dispute arises.
Yeah.
You might have a little bit more power even to sort of diffuse a potential dispute.
Yeah. That's interesting because I lived in an HOA for 5 years. The one time that I referenced CC&Rs was when I had to replace a fence.
Yeah.
That's literally it. Never looked at it again.
And sometimes that's the case. I mean, sometimes you don't have to, but when you do, it becomes very important.
But I remember someone in the neighborhood too painted their house like it was a time where gray was the color of everything. Right. And someone painted their house gray. I thought it was, and didn't match the neighborhood. And the thought was, I'm like, how did they get that through?
Maybe it was the board president.
Yeah, I just found that interesting. But yeah, never looked at my CC&Rs, but there is an incredible amount of power that those things have, both in both scenarios. What are the things that you need to abide by, but also the way that the board needs to abide. By not looking at them, you're really you're almost playing Russian roulette to a certain extent.
It's like playing a board game without knowing the rules.
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good transition too now into sort of bylaws.
Yeah.
Because those exist in a different universe, but are very relevant to you.
Yeah.
Because really, if you're looking at bylaws, I mean, that's corporate governance. It's really what it is. It's how does this corporation, how is it supposed to function? How is it supposed to run things? And it's sort of the ticky-tacky nature of that entity. And so what's interesting here is, the disputes that arise from bylaws is where the association is not doing any of these things, or they're not following them, or they're supplementing them, or they're not, doing certain things that are just required by way of the bylaws. And that becomes very problematic. And that could be anything from, voting to the composition of the board, to the meetings, to the procedures, to the committee structures of
elections,
all of these things.
Yeah.
Right. And so it ironically, a bad association structure, the people who aren't following the rules, can bleed over into the CC&Rs.
Yeah.
Right. So there's sort of this relationship that the two have, right? Because if you don't have, for example, an architectural control committee, or if you don't have a committee that enforces the rules, or the CC&Rs, then all of a sudden the CC&Rs aren't being enforced, or they're being enforced incorrectly, right? So there is sort of a through line into the CC&Rs. So often, I think the disputes that arise is where you have a board who just disregards the formalities of that entity. And that's when they're doing whatever they want. Maybe they hold a meeting, maybe they don't, maybe they put notification up, maybe they don't. And it often drives homeowners crazy because it's not predictable, which it should really be predictable.
Yeah.
But that's where a lot of tension exists with the bylaws. And so bylaws can be a very powerful source of power too, because you can come in and sort of say, you guys have a fiduciary to the community, you have a fiduciary relationship, and you're not abiding by the core document.
Yeah.
Right. So bylaws are a good way to examine a board to say, hey, are they doing this right? Are they playing the game correctly? And it will lay it out.
Does it say how many times, again, this is complete ignorance. In most scenarios, are they supposed to say we hold elections every year?
Yeah, it should be very clear on just how the board should function, how the thing should run, how elections should go. What does that look like?
Meeting minutes, all that.
All of that.
Yeah.
And some bylaws are better than others, but they can be a huge source of a nightmare for a homeowner, especially when the board disregards them. It's similar to the board that disregards the CC&Rs.
Yeah.
They're disregarding the CC&Rs. There's a good chance that they're not following the formalities of the bylaws.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
I want to get someone on this show that their job is to write CC&Rs. That would just be an interesting conversation, I think. There's got to be a person, because a construction company or a community development company or whatever. I mean, they're in charge of architecture, and building these things out, and plumbing, all the fun stuff.
Right.
But they hire out to
typically it is the association's counsel. Right. So associations, the better ones, will have an attorney, and that attorney is supposed to sort of help guide them. Right. Now, there's some really great attorneys that do a good job that represent associations. There are.
Yeah.
But there are some really bad ones that just don't care. I mean, I've seen it.
Yeah.
They just sort of listen to the board, or the association council will make recommendations. The board won't follow it, and it just becomes problematic. But normally when you're looking at those CC&Rs, it's the corporate counsel or the attorney for the association who is in charge of that.
Interesting. It would be interesting to just get in the mind of the person, this is what I'm looking for. And I assume that they, from the onset, they're with you in terms of what you guys are aligned on both sides, and say, we don't want disputes. We want a neighborhood that runs smoothly. Right from the onset, right? The goal for I'm assuming their counsel that's drafting these CC&Rs is, I want to try to remove the ambiguity. The good ones. The good ones. I want to remove as much ambiguity. I want this neighborhood to be ran in a way that it's harmonious, and we don't want to stain on the neighborhood.
Right. And I think that is a good association attorney who's looking out for the community as a whole.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have other association attorneys who, sometimes they're weaponized by the board.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're used to sort of stack all the power into the board, right? So it sort of slants towards the board.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you see problems, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the good ones are really there, I think, to just clarify the relationships and the obligations.
Yeah.
And they do exist.
Yeah.
But, obviously that's not always the case. It's not always altruistic and positive.
Yeah. Let's jump into our. We covered a lot of this. Covered a lot of the CC&R, like the handling of what they're defined as. Making sure that you review your governing documents, making sure that review any updates, all that fun stuff. I think we jump right into the Reddit rapid fire. What do you think?
I love it.
Okay.
Yep. This is my favorite part of the show because I have no idea what you're going to say.
Okay. So for those of you that don't know, that are only listening to one episode at a time, the Reddit rapid fire is pretty fun because we go on Reddit where people complain.
Yes.
And there's a subreddit specifically for people that have problems with their HOAs. Right. And so whatever the episode's topic is, I'll find a spicy post there, throw it to you, and you'll make your comment on it. This one was pretty quick, actually.
Yeah, and just a disclaimer, obviously this is just a general analysis of the dispute. It's not specific legal advice. Again, general. We're just kind of doing this as a exercise, if you will.
Yeah, I need to have like a little
disclaimer pop up so I don't have to say that every time.
Disclaimer and like a little like theme song or like, like if you're watching like the Tonight Show and it's like
we'll increase the budget of the show.
Yeah, 2 more comments and we'll be able to do it. Okay.
2 years we have a band.
Okay, this is a short one.
Okay.
My HOA has a rule in the CC&Rs that says all exterior paint colors must be approved. But my next door neighbor just painted their door purple with no approval. When I asked the board about it, they said they, quote, decided to allow it. Can they just ignore the CC&Rs when they want to?
Oh, that's odd. Maybe it's a smaller board. Typically, I see those types of situations when it's like a five unit community. The smaller associations kind of make these oddball decisions. My concern there, I have several concerns. One, the CC&Rs exist as an enforceable document, right?
Yeah.
So in theory, the neighbor could hold the association accountable and say, why are you giving special treatment to somebody?
Yes.
Because you have to understand from a CC&Rs perspective, the application has to be uniform.
Yeah. I think getting back to what is the point of these things?
Correct. It's the uniform application.
Yeah.
So the big problem with something like that is where the board is saying, hey, you know what? I understand that we have all these rules and regulations, but we really love Susie. She's my best friend. I'm going to make an exception. Well, that to me is preferential treatment. Yeah. Or another way of cutting it would be selective enforcement, meaning if you try to, paint your door purple, it's not going to be allowed. Or you have to go through procedures. You have to go through the architectural control committee.
Yeah.
But Susie can just do what she wants.
Yeah.
Right. So that becomes very problematic potentially.
Yeah.
And so typically it would be a sort of an attack on the board for that selective enforcement, preferential treatment, not following the CC&Rs. I mean, that could be a very problematic situation for the board if they don't have, they're not going to really have any sort of backing other than to say, well, we just want to make an exception for her.
Let's assume that it's not malicious, that the board just says, I know we're going to allow the neighbors to have a little more, or our community to have a little more leeway and not be so restrictive. So let's just say that it's not a restrictive, that you can paint your door purple now as too. Like they're going to let it happen.
So the courts are going to allow for some deference to the associations.
Okay.
Now, if there is a looser sort of enforcement policy, or if the board is not so rigid or draconian, so long as that is applied everywhere to everybody.
Yeah.
And there's not favoritism.
Sure.
Favoritism becomes problematic.
Yeah.
And if in this situation, if she could say, hey, I submitted an application for purple, I was denied, and Susie got it in and she didn't even submit an application.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very problematic. Or everyone else who ever wanted to paint their door had to go through the application process, had to go through the architectural control committee, and they had to follow procedure, but someone was not, it didn't have to, and they just got rubber stamped, or they got a high five. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's where you run into problems.
Let's assume that this person that posted this though has a disdain for purple. Like they're bothered because the neighborhood now is they bought into this neighborhood thinking that it's going to maintain a certain uniformity. right?
Right.
And they're actually just irritated that Susie painted her door because it does not. She got approval. They gave her like yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Like
Okay.
and now me posting this here, I'm upset because I bought in this neighborhood and the CC&Rs are clear that you cannot paint the door purple, but yet the board just let it happen.
Yeah, I think you have to look at this more globally. What else has the board done? What other things have they allowed or disallowed? And just because you happen to not like one little thing, right, and you have a personal vendetta against purple, so long as the board has maybe not been so rigid with other homeowners, have let other things go, it's going to be a little bit more challenging from the homeowner's perspective versus no one has ever been allowed purple. It's been historically denied.
Yeah.
And this one person got it through.
Yeah.
That's the issue. That's where a conflict could arise.
I think what bothers me about the whole situation, though, even, I mean, I see how they set precedent and that goes on. But if I am a homeowner and say, I just don't like the color purple, and the CC&Rs are very, very clear, you cannot paint.
Well, I'm not saying you couldn't enforce.
Yeah.
I'm saying you could launch an
I got
attack.
it. Yeah.
But now I'm looking a little bit further down in terms of how this thing shakes out legally.
Yeah.
Because these are certain things you're going to have to show and establish and prove up. And so you could actually prevail, right?
Yeah.
Under a failure to enforce or some sort of preferential treatment, selective enforcement type of theory.
Yeah.
And the board could back down and say, hey, you know what? You're right. We shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And mandate that the purple door is restored to its original condition.
Yeah, because it just seems like if you let if Susie was able to get away with it, then you just open up a big can of worms.
You can.
That nothing in it reeks to me. Nothing in the CC&Rs mean anything if they're not enforced.
Now you're looking at potential breach of fiduciary,
right?
Failure to comply with the CC&Rs, the governing documents. So I mean, I'm not saying you're without arguments.
Yeah.
Okay. But you got to see how globally and historically, how is the board operated?
Yeah.
That's really the real part of the analysis.
Yeah. I would assume too, it's really hard if the board has been kind of just loosey-goosey about it. Let's just say a new board comes in and they become really loose about some of these things. Then down the line, this could just be ripe with disputes at that point.
Yeah.
Like by allowing this to happen, and they're just being, let's just say that they're doing it because they're being kind, or just like, this is a little draconian. We're going to just be loose about it.
Right.
But that is like Pandora's box being open, because now we're saying that the CC&Rs aren't as
I think to your point, best practices is just follow the CC&Rs.
Follow the CC&Rs.
Right. Don't get into a situation because it does become a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And when you have a slippery slope situation, that's where legal disputes arise.
Right.
Because there's, questions about is this preferential treatment? Is it selective enforcement? Is there some people who are being treated very differently than others?
Yeah.
And so again, best practices, just follow the CC&Rs.
Yeah. Because back to your point in the beginning of the episode, a lot of disputes that you see are in the ambiguity.
Correct.
Too.
Ambiguity or failure to enforce.
Right.
That's where they arise.
Right. So, that's a tough one. Because there's so many parties here. There's three parties that could feel that they're
right.
That they did the right thing,
right.
But all could be wronged in some small way.
Oh, welcome to the world of association law. Well, Marty, thank you. I think that was very helpful.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I hate to say I sound like I keep repeating myself like a broken record, but I do actually learn more, like every episode, a little tidbit of something that I didn't know before, even after doing this I think we're doing this over a year.
Yeah. So, well, good. Hopefully our listeners learned as well. And again, thank you for watching Bad HOA. If you like us, subscribe. And if you also like us, hit like button. I'm still working out the specifics of that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of influencers have that down. So
yeah, we'll refine it. But comment too. Comments are great. We do look at the comments. We do try to respond to each one without giving legal advice. Right. But they are interesting.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot of people here that come to the door and say, hey, we heard about you. We listen to your podcast. So it's pretty cool to see.
Well, I love it. And thank you for watching. And until next time.